Hello and welcome to this latest webinar in our e-commerce world review series for November 2024. I'm Paul Skeldon, I'm one of the editors at RetailX, and we're talking today about the European marketplaces market. Off the back of our report that we launched a couple of weeks ago, in fact, that analyses Europe's marketplaces market. And we'll be talking today about some of the key findings in that report, but more importantly, I'm going to be joined by Ed from Adyen. We're going to have a discussion about the sort of key themes that came out of the report and what that means for marketplaces and for the retailers and merchants who sell on them going forward. So Ed, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Good to see you. Just for those that don't know of Adyen, if you could maybe just give us a little heads up as to who you are, first of all, and what the company does.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Paul, for the intro. Yeah, so I'm Ed Perkins. I'm one of the leads for our marketplaces and platform offering at Adyen. So the question is, who is Adyen? So Adyen is a global financial technology partner, specifically in payments. We work with a lot of the large marketplaces that you reference in this report, the likes of Vinted, eBay, and Etsy. We were founded in 2006, and we've gone from strength to strength now. So we've got 28 global offices and over 4,000 employees. But what do we really do for marketplaces specifically? Well, we offer a full stack solution. And what do I mean by that? It's not only just the processing and acquiring of payments, but actually it's more around the KYC on onboarding to ensure that that's absolutely seamless, the compliance that comes with that. We have our own risk engine, etc. And also then the disbursement of fees and sales, etc. to their sellers and to the marketplaces. And we do that in a safe and compliant manner. I think the key points I want to raise about Adyen here is all of our tech is built in-house, so we have no third parties within the money flow, for example, and we haven't grown by merger and acquisitions. So what does that mean? It means that we can really innovate at speed. And I think that's the key point for remaining competitive in this area, especially payments and marketplaces have moved on so quickly. So having a partner that can really innovate and own that technology, and you know who you're speaking to, is a really important part. And adding to that, we've got our banking licenses, which just adds additional USPs, really, parts of revenue streams, but more importantly, how do we handle that money going forward, and what can we provide a marketplace? But we'll touch more upon that a bit later in the report.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, and there's a lot of expertise from all the things you do that give you a great insight actually into some of the trends that we'll see in that have emerged from the report. So getting to that, I won't bore everybody since this with pulling the report apart in great detail. I'm just going to skip through some of the key findings and that leads really to sort of what we need to discuss, which are some of the sort of key trends that emerge. Now, just to put the sort of the marketplace market in context within Europe, this is a beautiful, if somewhat complicated, tanky chart as to how Europe's top 1,000 retailers sort of can be segmented by sector, business type, and headquarters. And as you can see there, it's a fairly diverse split. Marketplaces account for just 21% of the business types there. But if you drill down sort of more into the numbers, what becomes interesting is that while 21% of the top 1,000 retailers in Europe are marketplaces, they do in fact account for 53% of the traffic that's directed at the top 1,000, which I think sort of is a number that's grown year by year, because we do this report each year and have done since 2020. And this proportion has steadily grown and now has tipped past the halfway point. Which I think is very interesting sort of development, as that I think what it shows us is that consumers are particularly interested in using marketplaces, largely because of the convenience that they offer. It's a one-stop shop, really, in a lot of cases for buying things. It's an easy way of finding things. I think, as we'll touch on in the discussion later on about retail media, it's also results from marketplaces start to surface more, but that's a sort of different matter. But overall, marketplaces in Europe are becoming the dominant force in how consumers buy. Now, it doesn't necessarily sort of mean that they're not buying from retailers. They are. It's just retailers are having to adapt to some degree to sell through marketplaces, even though marketplaces are just 21% of the retailers out there. So that's probably the key sort of takeaway from this year's report, that proportion of marketplaces relevant relative to other retailers in Europe has grown and has slipped past the 50% mark. If you look at where those those marketplaces that have been in Europe are headquartered, the bulk of them are based outside of Europe. Now, this figure is slightly skewed because the volume of traffic that goes to certain marketplaces, as we shall see. But if you look at this the other way around, the proportion that are headquartered in Europe is also slowly growing. And I think this is also starting to demonstrate how the marketplace model is not only becoming more popular among consumers, but also it's starting to become a sort of much better business opportunity within Europe, and marketplaces are popping up within European countries, emulating other successful marketplaces and those sort of models that are seen in other countries and more universally, but they're starting to be much more sort of localized as well as specialized, again, as we'll talk about shortly. If you look at within those marketplaces, what they do, the bulk of traffic is to multi-sector ones, again skewed by a couple of very well-known, very large marketplaces that are multi-sector. However, if you look at how fashion and to some degree consumer electronics, they don't appear to take sort of the same huge amount of traffic, but that's actually quite a significant proportion for very sort of specialized marketplaces, and those two sectors are particularly hot in marketplaces. But we are starting to see more around supermarkets in particular, not just in selling groceries online, but in terms of adding marketplace functionality and selling other things, which again is another key and emerging trend. So yes, multi-sector marketplaces are a dominant force still, but that dominance is slightly starting to erode. This idea for consumers, at least, that marketplaces, especially multi-sector ones, can be a sort of search engine for shopping. You just type into it what you're looking for and it'll probably have it, is still very prevalent, but it's starting to drift back as more specialized marketplaces take precedence. Now, this is just a snapshot. We do list the top 50 marketplaces in Europe in the report. I think there's 22 here. This was just sort of page one. I just wanted to sort of give you an idea of who those top ones are and what their sort of level of traffic from Europe is. And again, if you look at this, you can see that there are some well-known and very generalist marketplaces at the top, but it does then start to sort of fragment into a much more focused and more specialized set of marketplaces as you go down the list. And this continues as you go further through the top 50 and into the top 100 and beyond. It gets more and more specialized and more localized as well by country. We don't list sort of here the countries of origin, but if you look at that, most of these are sort of pan-European at the top of the list. But as you go further down, they become more specialized and more localized. If you look at that in terms of traffic share, it becomes obvious there's a very massive long tail. So zooming in there on the top, you can see that sort of Amazon and eBay dominate by sort of they're way out in front, 5 times more than their sort of nearest sort of rival. And even these big ones like AliExpress and Allegro, which is huge in Poland, and Shein, which is becoming bigger and bigger, take a very small proportion. But as you go down that list, it tends to zero. They're not zero, but it goes on and on, this long tail. But I think that in itself is interesting in that it is becoming, as I say, much more specialized and much more localized. And how those marketplaces market themselves, how they differentiate themselves, and how they sort of specialize is what's becoming crucial in this market. Now, before we dive more deeply into that, I just want to use this as an example. The bulk of the report focuses on 25 of the leading and most interesting. So it's not the top 25, it's the 25, I think, most interesting marketplaces currently in Europe, where we look at who they are, what they do, the challenges and financial performance that they face currently. We also look on each one at how they perform, based against our own ConsumerX retail metrics, which are explained in the report. But it gives a really good comparative view of how the different generalized and specialist and niche and localized marketplaces, how they perform in terms of not just revenue and profit and those sorts of things, but how they perform against sort of factors along those lines of delivery convenience, returns convenience, and sort of shopability and the channels they use, mobile, online, etc. So the bulk of the report is really an interesting comparison of how these marketplaces operate and how they, to some degree, compete with each other. So there's 25 of these in the report, along with a lot of other data and a lot of other analysis about how the market has developed since 2023 and where it's likely to go in 2025. Now, the key things that emerged from this, where I want to bring Ed in to pick his brains about what he sees on the ground, dealing directly with marketplaces and with the companies that want to sell on marketplaces, are that there's this large versus small sort of demarcation happening amongst marketplaces, and generalist versus specialist. There's a sort of subset of that. There's a rise in retailer-run marketplaces. We're seeing a surge in how markets of all kinds use retail media and marketing and what they do with the data. So that's all sort of kind of interlinked there in terms of sort of they have a huge amount of data. They're finding much smarter ways of using it. And I think the overarching thing that comes out of this is that the marketplace market in Europe, while very successful and growing, it is becoming fiercely. So, Ed, bringing you back in here, thank you for patiently sitting through all that. I was going to hopefully sort of see what your views are on this. And I'm going to try and break it down into these key themes. So first of all, the thing we're seeing is there's this large versus small sort of split. There's a few massive ones, the Amazon, eBay, to some degree AliExpress, that sort of thing. But we're seeing in that long tail that I showed a huge number of smaller marketplaces. What challenges does that sort of present, do you think? And what does it chime with what you're seeing?
Well, yeah, it absolutely does, actually. And so we are seeing a larger number of smaller marketplaces come in, but they have very similar characteristics. And what I mean by that, they normally have a very defined USP. What are they trying to solve for? Who are they trying to sell to? And that's very clear from the outset. They're also tending to look at specific demographics and service those buyers better and provide a more tailored service around there. And generally, you see that their fees are generally lower than the big players in there. The eBays, the Etsy's, for example, and the Amazon charge quite considerable fees for use of their services because you've got the logistics around it, etc. So they're generally lower fees, but also some type of specialism. So when we look at this, we've got a pretty nice example here of Holly & Co. Started in 2023, actually, but it's the founder, Holly Tucker, from Nottingham High Street, so a lot of pedigree around there. And this marketplace is designed around providing highly curated gifts from a number of very small businesses, mainly around women in business, but their specialism that they're doing there is how to get into business and providing that sort of level of knowledge, specialism, workshops, etc., to allow for these sellers to get onto a marketplace and provide their products. And so because it's highly targeted, we're seeing that they have a very good core following, and those sellers are very, very loyal to that because that's how they got their start. So it's a really interesting setup that it needs to be specialized, the demographics need to be there, but they can be very successful based upon being very targeted. I think the key challenge for all of these platforms, and actually some of much of the larger ones as well, is this idea of disintermediation. Big word. What does it mean? It's effectively when a buyer will go onto a marketplace, find a product that they like, and actually, can I go direct to source? Would I get it cheaper? direct to source. And so a lot of the marketplaces are trying to tackle this, because obviously they're then taking out all the effort was provided by the marketplace and the seller, but then they're going to the seller. And one of the ways that this is being tackled is actually really knowing the buyer. What is the type of payment mix and experience that really that they want to have to ensure that they stay loyal to that marketplace and thus to the seller. So it needs to be really easy, and the payments need to be there, and the trust needs to be built. And there's various different ways that platforms are sort of building that trust and that loyal following, and we'll come onto those in a bit. I think we see this more within the sort of like the online travel, like Booking.com and Airbnb. And so it's how do they facilitate the buyer so much so that the trust is built, and that's really by finding a lot of information, and it will tie in next with the data point. How much information can I provide on that product or particular service, and do I trust it enough that actually I don't need to go to the seller direct? And for the seller's partners, am I getting the best buyers I can? And I think that trust factor is key. So a lot of challenges in the space, but specialism, I think, is a key, and targeted demographics.
Yeah, absolutely. Which brings us neatly to the sort of second sort of key trend, is this idea of the sort of broad-based marketplace versus sort of the specialised. In some ways, that's related to the large versus small. I think some of the smaller ones are also very specialised. But is that something you sort of seeing as well, that there is this sort of shift, not amongst the sort of top tier, those ones at the sort of top sort of 2 or 3 places, but in this long tail of marketplaces, is it that there is an increasing specialism, I think, and within that, some of that is sort of localized specialism as well. Is that something you're seeing?
Absolutely, and I think the way marketplaces are now viewing themselves as well, they're more than just an area to sell these products for sellers, and they have to be. They have to generate that interest to go on there. And so we sort of looked at it as that they're becoming more of trusted advisors. And so if we just keep that in mind, we've got some really good examples of where marketplaces are being successful by being more than just a marketplace. So the Sole Supplier, a really nice platform that we work with. What do? They effectively link sellers on all these different types of trainers, for example, or sneakers, to the market. But they actually started off as more of a social platform for news on what is the latest in fashion, who's producing what, when is it going to be coming out, and a lot of interactions. And so what they do now is they provided the marketplace, but they're completely agnostic. So you go onto there because you're a sneakerhead and you're really interested in what's going to happen, and you can talk to others about it and actually see them there. And then that agnostic view of those sellers, of those trainers coming in, and exactly when it's going to drop, as they call it. So that's a nice little take on it, using that sort of community environment to become specialized on that, but also being agnostic. We also see it with Backmarket. So what do Backmarket do? If you're not aware, they take tech that needs to be reconditioned, whether it's your old iPhones, old laptops, etc., and they'll refurbish it, and then they'll sell it on their marketplace. But they've done two things here. They've tackled from the environmental point of view. There's a feel-good factor, because the environmental impact of using refurbished tech is a lot less than producing new ones. So people go in there for a feel-good factor. But they also really double down on the expertise. There's a lot of advice and guidance given by webinars and product demos, and actually use cases. People can go in there and go, this is what I'm going to be using it for. What would you suggest? And so the marketplace is seen more than just a place to purchase products, but also gives that advice and guidance, and that leads into buyers going onto that marketplace and feeling comfortable from that point of view. And then one which is slightly outside of this, but is actually tackling a really important issue, and we're seeing this with more and more marketplaces doing that, is Too Good To Go. So they tackled the idea of food wastage. At the end of the day, many restaurants, cafes, whoever it is, have unsold product. And so they're linking buyers to be able to purchase those products at discounted prices at the end of the day. And so you're tackling the whole food wastage issue. There's a very good environmental, moral, and social component to it, and ultimately servicing a number of buyers here that wouldn't be able to afford that food in the first place, and allowing it for much discounted. And what do the sellers get from that? They actually get a little bit back from stuff that would have been complete wastage, no money available for it. They get a little bit back, but they're really focusing on that moral and social components is the real specialism of there, and just tackling that need to tackle food wastage is quite an interesting part.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because a couple of those examples, actually, in the report, we do a profile on Backmarket. So download the report, you can learn even more about them and see how their model performs. But this idea of specialism, in my mind, when I was writing the report, it was about specialising in a particular vertical. But actually, we're starting to see them specialise in, say, the environmental side of things. And I think that's a really interesting thing. I think sort of in next year's report, that's something we need to explore further, that specialism actually has gone beyond simply being about servicing different verticals, but it's about servicing different kind of consumer interest points. So yeah, that's a really interesting point. I think also sort of building on this sort of specialism area is one of the sort of other trends, which I kind of think is a bit of a sub-trend to that one, is this idea that there's more retailer-run marketplaces are cropping up. And sort of, well, we see it in the report, in the data, and in some of the profiles. Obviously, they do it to expand what they can do more rapidly, and maybe to sort of expand their reach into other countries more easily. It expands their range of products because they can add sort of allied products rather than sort of have to stock it all themselves. That's a really sort of interesting sort of thing that's making the market even more competitive. Do you think it's a good thing? Do you think it's a trend we're going to continue to see, and think it's good for the market?
I definitely see it continuing. I mean, as you've highlighted there, that, you know, these retailers may have a very strong brand domestically, and so that should be leveraged. Absolutely, sellers want to sell alongside them, especially when it's the idea of complementary goods. I think that's a real key driver for that, and also leveraging their logistics setup. I mean, a number of these sellers would want to sell side by side on these brands and leverage that logistics setup, whether that be domestic or especially internationally. It's so hard to set that up, so why not? And what's good for the retailer there is that, you know, their logistics setup is being used to its maximum, etc. So they're getting every pound from it, and so I see it as a very symbiotic relationship. And how this is working, but interestingly, we're now seeing those retail, and it's not just to retailers, but actually looking at different channels. So we know that the marketplace has traditionally been an e-commerce channel, and that's where it started off, and that's where the vast majority of all the sales happen. But actually, we're working with a German home improvement retailer, very, very big in Germany. They have a big online presence. They have a big marketplace there, but they also have a big store presence. And so they are now looking at, and about to launch, is how do I create a marketplace in-store environment? And the idea is, as a shopper, you're in with their store, you're walking around, you're purchasing their items. As you take it up to the self-checkout, you'll put those items through, and next to you is a kiosk. And that kiosk will use AI to identify complementary items from the marketplace that you could purchase at that time as well. And then using the logistics or pick up from in-store, purchase all those items together. So it's taking that marketplace idea from an e-commerce channel and turning it into a point-of-sale channel, which is a really interesting take on it as well. We hope to see how successful that is. And I suspect that more retailers will look at doing that as well as we go forwards. I think also, if we look at traditional marketplaces, whether they be retailer or not, is how would they service their sellers as much as they possibly can? And one of the ideas that we're seeing and starting to take off is, actually, what if I have a small business seller and they want to go to a trade show, or they want to go, do some sales down the local market, or whatever it is, go to an event. Now, typically, that marketplace wouldn't have been able to service those sales. That's out of the channel. That seller would have to go with another provider, get a small unit, and take payments that way. It's completely out of the marketplace's ecosystem. But actually, marketplaces are now looking at, can I offer a hybrid model where I can offer something like a tap to pay idea, so turning the seller's mobile phone into a payment device. It's quite simple to do now. The app is downloaded, and your iOS or your Android device can take payments. And what that means then is they can go to that trade show, take sales, but it all flows back into the marketplace ecosystem, and so those sales will land into the same UI that the seller goes into. They see all of the sales trending, easier for reconciliation for that seller, not having to look across two parties there. And ultimately, they get a single payout rather than getting payout from different providers there. I think this is a really interesting evolution of the marketplace, leveraging their technology, but also expanding their channel so they can service their sellers better and ultimately create more stickiness.
That's very interesting, isn't it? Because one of the sort of limitations to some degree of marketplaces has been that they are largely online focused, but this does take them into a much more multi and omni-channel offering, which has been missing from that particular part of the retail market. So yeah, no, that's interesting. It's interesting to know it all hinges around payments as well. So that's good. I mean, everything hinges around payments. It's the most important part of it, really. Apart from perhaps marketing, which is one of the other sort of trends that has been thrown up by this. Now, retail media has grabbed a lot of headlines this year, but I think the overall sort of retail media marketing and data use side of marketplaces has become really important. For those that don't know, retail media is where retailers sell essentially access to their first-party customer data through placements and adverts on their websites, that kind of thing. For people who don't know, we are doing a webinar in this series of webinars about retail media, so check that one out if you want to know more about it. But we're seeing a lot of it. I mean, Amazon in some ways sort of pioneered retail media because it does sort of, let people pay to appear more prominently on its sort of site. So, that's the idea behind it. But we're seeing a lot more of that in marketplaces, because marketplaces have so much data, and how they use that data is now becoming a more crucial sort of part of not only fighting the competition and getting people to come to your particular merchant on your particular marketplace, but it's also becoming something that sort of is driving the economics of marketplaces. Now, that's something you've definitely seen, isn't it, Ed?
Absolutely, and I think the marketing media and the revenue that's driven is complementing the marketplace, but also sellers are now having to look at how do I compete on that specific marketplace. Now, generally, I think when you look at the idea of retail media and then bundling as well and go, can I get lower fees elsewhere if a seller was to take more marketing advertisement from me? I think that's where we're seeing a number of marketplaces. How do we complement it? And also, how do we keep those sellers? We don't want to drive them away because of the cost of advertising. So I think there's a little bit of a battle there, but we'll see that play out. But I think just and taking a holistic look at use of data, I think there's so much more that can be done, and we are seeing a number of marketplaces really look at how do we look at our shopper profiles, but also how do we provide that information back to our sellers in a really usable form, so they can then make informed decisions. Okay, I didn't realize that actually these are the type of demographics that are purchasing my product because I only see it from the marketplace, and that can give them different ideas of how to market themselves. So that's a really interesting one. But also the loyalties and sort of discounts, providing them with that next step rather than just a loyalty and marketplace, loyalty and discounts to the marketplace. Can I then, as a marketplace, provide that back down to the seller as well? So increasing that seller stickiness because they know that they're getting a really good service, and also that their shoppers are coming through to use that seller via that marketplace while they're going to direct. I think this is, in one way, we'll tackle that disintermediation, is by using the data more, as you mentioned, about using the relevant information and as concise as possible is really important. But we use a lot of the data. So within Adyen, part of our core component is sort of risk and compliance, and so we use the data to identify bad actors, both on transactions coming in, but also sellers, and we can leverage this across many different marketplaces. So I'll give you an example. If someone signs up to eBay as a seller and does naughty things, should we say, and that we can identify that and actually check across all of our marketplace and say, is that seller on there, and then inform the marketplace what do they want to do about it, because we are highlighting risk. So I think data is becoming so important in this area, not just from driving loyalty and lowering fees and advertisement, but actually how the whole ecosystem works and protecting it.
We can't really talk about data without talking about AI. What sort of role is AI playing? You mentioned it earlier about sort of some of the targeting, but what about AI in all this?
AI is a really interesting one. I mean, there's two great examples, in the marketplaces now with Temu and Shein, that you mentioned. But the whole idea of social media posts that are being created and that lot, and the imprints that are placed upon it, there's a massive AI engine behind both of those type of platforms that takes those ideas and turns them within 10 days into fashion items. It's not, I've got this product and I'll purchase it from the marketplace. So they're actually taking that live data and saying, what do people really, really want? And then converting it around. And we're just going to see a more and more explosion for that. AI is going to be used consistently across marketplaces more and more. And with those two examples, AI-driven manufacturing is a new concept really to me, but I was really surprised reading and seeing how it works out. It's a very powerful proposition.
Well, absolutely, and how does anyone compete with that? That's if they're so on the ball, they're producing products basically to demand, which is an extraordinary and different about face really to how any of this has ever worked before. But that does play into this idea that the overarching thing I think that's come out of this year's report particularly is how the marketplace market is just so competitive now. So there are these big players that obviously take up a lot of the sales and traffic. So that's one form of competition. There's all the specialty, which becomes competitive within each of the niches that they're in. As you just mentioned, the sort of AI-driven product sort of creation from sort of new, I'll call them new players, Temu, Shein, because they're relatively new compared to some of the more established ones. But they make it so fiercely competitive. What a market, the established marketplaces and to some degree the merchants that use them, what are they to do? I mean, how can they sort of counter this competition?
I think there's two key areas here. I mean, if we take a typical marketplace that is strong domestically, well, they need to. There'll be a couple of ways that they can improve, but obviously international expansion is going to be key for them. They've got a really good product, a pretty good USP. How do we roll that out? Now, the European market it's not fragmented, but it's very nuanced, and each market has different challenges, different drivers, and different success metrics. And so that's while that marketplace may be very successful domestically, actually they need a really good partner to take them internationally. And what I mean by that is, let's just take the average one. Say if I move from the UK into France and Germany. Well, France and Germany, first of all, have very different payment mixes. So carte bancaire, for example, is one of the predominant payment methods in France, where Girocard and PayPal are in Germany. And if you go to the Netherlands, it's ideal. So actually having a partner that knows the European market well is actually critical, and the ability to facilitate those type of payments just on the front end, so to make sure that your shopper experience is as seamless as possible. I mean, that'll be one of the key components there. But also the regulatory framework and KYC is different when you go across Europe. All the legal entities, documentation, and everything. So every new seller that you're onboarding has a completely different legal framework which they work with. So having a partner that understands that already, has the local offices to ensure that they keep up to date with those compliance frameworks is really, really important. And I think if we just drill down into that a bit, we've got the Payment Services Directive 3 coming out, so PSD3 coming out, which is only going to tighten and protect the shopper experience from an e-commerce point of view. And there's a few facets in there, but the key one for marketplaces, they have to be out for money flow in a way of like keeping sellers' funds completely separate from their own. Yeah. And this is a thing, and to remain compliant in this world, you need a partner that understands that and can do that. And that's going to be across the whole of Europe. The UK will adopt something very, very similar. I think it's quite important from that part. And then you've got.
Oh God, sorry. Carry on. Yes.
Well, I was just thinking about the risks as well. As you expand as well, your risks expand. E-commerce is, traditionally more risky than in-person payments. So the risk of bad actors and collusion, as I sort of mentioned, just increases as we go through. So I say we use a lot of machine learning and AI for that part, but that's really to protect the marketplace as well. Scheme fines can be huge. Visa and MasterCard, if you've got chargebacks coming through because of bad actors, ultimately there'll be fines associated with it, but they could even stop the use of Visa and MasterCard on your marketplace, which would be pretty detrimental, I'd say. So having a true partner that can help you get out into Europe and beyond would be a key idea, I think.
There's also this idea as well that I know you and I have discussed previously about financial services, about marketplaces sort of offering financial services as a differentiator, which is well, there are some examples which you can share with us, but it's an unusual idea and not one I don't think that's particularly well known. Can you tell us a bit about how that works?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just say, what is it really? So it's the ability for the marketplace to offer financial offerings or services that traditionally the seller would have had to go elsewhere for. Think of high street banks, etc., like that. And why would they want to offer it? Well, it really does increase the seller's stickiness to that marketplace and retain their best sellers in the long term. But also importantly, it reduces the operational cost of those sellers because they have to source these capabilities elsewhere. And why not have it in the marketplace that they've come to trust and use wholeheartedly? I'll give you some examples. I mean, we already see within the market that eBay and Vinted, especially Amazon, offering capital out to their sellers to allow them to expand, to purchase new items, whatever it may be. So I think it's really important that we take that forward. And so you have to have a partner that, first of all, has banking licenses, but ultimately has the technology that can be embedded. But I'll give you sort of a run through or context around this. So imagine you've got a small business seller, say Jane. Jane sells pottery. She's on the marketplace. She has been there for 3 to 5 years, and everything's going really well. And she's looking to increase her business. Now, typically, she would have to get a loan. Maybe she wants to buy a new kiln, for example, or more clay or better premises to work within. Typically, she would have had to have gone to a bank, show her sales, make sure the bank sees her as a safe bet. She may or may not get a loan based on that. That is time, effort, and money for Jane. Actually, we have that data. The marketplace has that data. They know that Jane is a safe bet. We can see her sales on a monthly or daily basis. So the ability to add, say, something like a pre-approved capital loan or a merchant cash advance via the marketplace to Jane, I think is a key USP there, because Jane doesn't have to go elsewhere. She doesn't have to take that information to a bank and may not get approved, and it automatically goes within her bank account within a day. That builds the brand loyalty for Jane, and the marketplace increases that stickiness. And more importantly for the marketplace, it's a new revenue stream. So the way we do it at Adyen is we have a fixed fee, so everything is very, very clear. So Jane sees how much that she's paying back. The marketplace would take a certain percentage of the transactions that are coming in to repay that loan. So it's a very simple mechanism there. And then we share that fee with the marketplace. And so Jane hasn't had to go elsewhere. You can take this a step forward, and actually more than a few steps forwards. What if that marketplace can then offer a business account for her to manage all of her finances, so the incoming sales, what she pays suppliers, etc. All of that can be managed in one area embedded within the marketplace's UI. So Jane doesn't have to log on to something else to then manage the finances, sending it over. It all matches together for reconciliation. It makes it so much easier. Ultimately, for the marketplace, it's another revenue stream, like the interest held on that would go back, and there's some revenue shares there. But also, if we then Jane got issued a card that she can use with that bank account. She can then pay suppliers off or purchase raw materials. She can do all of her business transactions using that card. And then the interchange that's created from that card can be shared with a platform in the form of cashback to Jane as well. I think the point being here is we're looking at creating an ecosystem that Jane can manage all of her finances, get the cash advantage, do car spending, all within the marketplace's ecosystem. So Jane doesn't have to source it elsewhere. And there's revenue on both sides of this. And I think when we look at that and we say, actually, is this something that would be really valuable? I think a lot of sellers do go, okay, yeah, I've got 4 or 5 providers for this. I have to go out and do that. The high street doesn't know me. These are tailored products because the marketplace knows the seller and I think knows Jane. And that's a really important part of this. And then we come to the idea of bundling. And I really like this. So, for example, the marketplace is making these additional revenue streams. That means they can reduce Jane's fees on the other side for what she was selling, etc., and make it much more compelling for Jane to take these services as well. If she does a certain spend on card, then that revenue will go in, and that reduces the rates that she's charged from the marketplace from the typical transactions or subscriptions. So there's a whole new revenue stream that created, and a whole new stickiness that created with a seller, whilst providing the seller with a really tailored product where she doesn't have to go elsewhere. I think, we find it really compelling. I think over the next maybe 3 to 5 years, marketplaces that want to remain competitive will start to really look at this. We already see it with the big players, and so it's something that should be taken.
How difficult is it for a marketplace to offer this? What do they need to do? For those that are suddenly sat up in their chairs listening and thought, I need to do that. How do they do that?
Well, they have to work with a partner that has the technology and banking licenses. That's the key component to this. And we have an API first and sort of an embedded model. I think that's another key component. This needs to feel native. You don't want to have redirects to different accounts, etc., like that. So it should be all within the marketplace's UI or their user interface, where Jane logs into to see her sales. That's where the bank account should be. That's where the capital loan be, and that's where the card. And so we built sort of effectively a low-code option here. We've built them into components where a marketplace can drop that in already onto their site, into their UI. So while there is some effort to it, we're making it more and more easy to adopt this technology, and we provide the advice and guidance around it because it is a new area of business.
So I guess those are the downsides. It requires a bit of effort, and you've got to have a bit of financial knowledge, and I guess it's a bit of a sort of step into the dark. But do you think this is something we're going to see that's going to become a sort of a standard offering for many marketplaces? A merchant's going to expect it from marketplaces. Maybe that's the way to look at it.
And I think that's the interesting part. I think there will become an expectation, maybe not in the next 2 to 3 years, but in 5 years' time, it's like, why can't I get these services from the marketplace? And actually, marketplaces will want to start looking at this as it just gets even more and more competitive. How do you stand out from the crowd? How do you move forward? I think one of these will be ensuring that you have the best sellers on your platform and your marketplace, and ultimately you're servicing them the best they can. And offering financial services is one of those key areas that you can do.
Brilliant. It's really interesting. It's very interesting how these things are the sort of answer in some ways to the competitiveness that's built up through the market expanding so much. I must admit, when looking at the report, I didn't look at the financial services element. I certainly will do. I hope it's probably news to many people that's a competitive advantage. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you for sharing all of your knowledge and wisdom about the marketplaces that you work with. For those of you who want to explore this more, particularly as to how to embed payments on your platform, and I guess how to initiate a conversation with you about the financial services that you could help them offer, there's a QR code up on your screen now, so scan that. That will take you through directly to Ed, I'm assured. He will be answering all correspondence through that QR code in person and almost instantly. That's what my notes say. No, it won't be Ed directly, but do scan the code, and there's some really interesting stuff on the other end of that, and initiate, I think, a really interesting conversation. I think there are some really useful things to be done here. There's a link there to download the Marketplaces report. As I say, it's got some of the data. Well, it's got the data in that we started the webinar with, and a lot more sort of detail as to how the market is evolving and developing. It also includes, as I say, 25 profiles of key marketplaces in Europe, and so what makes them stand out and what makes them interesting, and how particularly they perform across a number of metrics. So do download that, do scan the QR code and talk to Ed. And in the meantime, Ed, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for sharing all of that. It's been really enlightening, really interesting. I'm going to go off and do some much more in-depth research about marketplaces and financial services, because I think it's a really interesting topic. So thank you for that. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in and watching. And we'll see you again soon on the next one.
Thanks, guys.